There are quite a few versions of the origin of man today, but three of them are the most popular. These are the theory of evolution, creationism, and the alien or cosmic version. Let's look at the facts, which allow us to take a different look at the generally accepted viewpoint of the origin of man. There is the encompassing or aqueous ape theory of Hydra pica, as from the savanna theory. It is only a hypothesis, but nevertheless explains some aspects of human development. According to it, after getting out of the jungle, our ancestor did not go to the savanna, but to the sea, to the lake, to bathe and dive. Here are some of the human characteristics associated with the Sakwa theory. Modern humans are able to dive due to arbitrary control of the breathing process. Moreover, humans have the so-called airway closure reflex. When immersed in water, this reflex is automatically triggered when water reaches the face. The windpipe is not separated from the esophagus, the larynx is low. Only aquatic mammals, such as seals, have a similar design. It allows you to control breathing, hold it and dive. The vital need of the human body to consume iodine and sodium chloride salt and usquart and found in seafood. Lack of iodine in the consumed products leads to thyroid disease, the possibility of a complete diet solely with the gifts of the sea. For example, Japanese cuisine on the treatment of large webbing between the fingers. About 7% of people are born with webbing between the toes. Humans have a webbing between their thumb and forefinger. Primates do not have them. Presence of primordial lubrication of newborn babies, also characteristic of marine mammals, but not monkeys. The presence of the swimming reflex in the newborn, which is atavistic in modern humans. A large amount of fatty tissue on the mammary glands is characteristic only of humans. This can be explained by the fact that the milk had to keep warm in cold water. In female apes, the mammary glands are small and without fatty tissue is all well and good, but maybe the Hydra opec didn't swim on this planet, or it doesn't matter where it swam at all? The important thing is that he served as a donor of genetic material. A number of historical documents testify to the cosmic origin of man. Sumerian mythology, the process of creation of man is described in most detail according to the sources. In the beginning the world was ruled by the gods, and the modern interpretation of the representatives of extraterrestrial civilizations, which were like people. They came from the heavens to the earth, the mastering of which required a lot of effort. The god Enki proposed to create a man to shift the burdens of labor onto him. One of the gods was put to death, his genetic material was taken and, as the source says, his flesh and blood were mixed with clay, and from the resulting material one man was created, similar to the gods, but a slave to them. Therefore, the expression servant of God has a very literal meaning. Other ancient texts also often refer to human-like creatures created by the Enki and the goddess mother. And here's the interesting thing, the results of mitochondrial DNA analysis showed that all humans are descendants of the same woman who lived about 200,000 years ago, so-called mitochondrial EU. A recent study by scientists shows that there are 223 genes in the human body that are not found in other inhabitants of the Earth. Perfeterin or blue blood, created in the early 80s of the 20th century, fit all humans without exception, perhaps in times immemorial. This term blue blood was used literally and applied just to members of other lands. Human blood, like the majority of animals, is red, due to the fact that the hemoglobin respiratory pigment contains iron ions, but there are organisms that have instead of hemoglobin copper-based hemocyanin. Blood of such beings blue color are some insects and mollusks. According to one version, the planet where the gods came from contains more honey than iron. And evolution there went in such a way that it was copper for the transport of gases and nutrients in the blood. The body temperature is 36.6 degrees Celsius is also not accidental, since it is at this temperature water has a minimum heat capacity. Let us turn to the graph. To maintain the temperature of water in the body at 36.6 degrees Celsius requires the least amount of heat than at other temperatures. It means less fuel in the form of food is less, the load on the cells and body systems as a whole. This temperature is low for the destruction of viruses, but there is also a mechanism for raising the temperature to 40 degrees or higher. When many bacteria and viruses die, humans are not created for life in earthly conditions, as evidenced by their physiological incapacity. Experts note a considerable number of such inconsistencies. Why, for example, did evolution give man the gift of permanently growing hair on his head in order to survive? But this is absurd. Imagine the child of ancient man, whom you do not scissors. Hair interferes with looking, moving, running away. It is impossible to explain the evolution of the constant and fairly rapid growth of hair on the head, because if there is any anomaly, as, for example, with this monkey, then the hair is lost completely on the whole body is also much more difficult for women than for most animals. And the period of helplessness of the newborn human is abnormally long compared to the same animal world. Back pain and other disorders of the locomotor system are due to poor adaptation of the skeletons, the current planetary conditions. Humans break limbs when falling from their own height, which is not observed in animals. A human can exist without clothes only in a very narrow temperature range of 20 to 26 degrees. Thermoregulation system based on evaporation, i.e., necessarily clothes and full hair cover, are not implied. This, by the way, is also an unsolved question of evolutionists. Where did the complete hair covered go? Magnetic storms have a deleterious effect on human resonance frequencies of noise, or rather changes of their parameters. Also, breathing during big jogging is so often that the organism obviously does not have enough oxygen for all metabolic processes. The biological body was designed for a different ratio of gases in the atmosphere, as well as for a different regime of sleep and rest. The so-called circadian rhythm of man is unequal to a 24-hour period. People for long periods of time in complete isolation, speleologists, for example, usually goes to a longer. The daily cycle is 26-32 o'clock. Moreover, there is a known case of a 56-hour circadian rhythm. This enigmatic peculiarity suggests that the duration of the day at 24 o'clock is not native to the human body. If we were to shrink down to the nano level and travel inside a living cell, we would see electric motors, conveyors, assembly lines, and even walking robots. Biologists estimate that there are about 40 molecular machines known to science functioning in a living cell. They drive loads on molecular rails, act as switches and switches for chemical processes of the molecular machine, produces energy to sustain life, contract our muscles, and build other molecular machines. For example, the proton from the syn pelvis is the smallest biological electric motor in living nature, only 10 nanometers wide. Living organisms use it to produce adenosine triphosphate. ATF consists of adenosine storing a lot of energy. This stored energy is needed to power a wide variety of biochemical reactions. Kinin Xena is a linear molecular motor that moves along the pathways of the cell. Polymeric filaments, as if a port loader, it drags on itself all kinds of cargoes of mitochondrial lysosome, using ATF molecules as fuel. Outwardly, nisin looks like a toy man woven from thin ropes. In this case, if one end of it expends the energy of an ATF molecule while moving, the other end releases a component to generate energy at the same time. The feedback ends up being a continuous cycle of supplying and expending energy for useful work, as Kinsey's research has shown. It is especially quite brisk to walk around the cell with its ropey legs, taking steps of only 8 nanometers per second and moving a gigantic 800 nanometers per second by cellular standards, that is, it takes 100 steps per second. Try to imagine such speeds in the human world. Stepping on paths made of microtubule blowers carry various loads in a cell. All this looks like the products of a civilization that was able to create artificial life forms, and recent research confirms that it is quite real. Human is capable. Create artificial nanorobots, which in the future will be able to live and work in the intracellular world. Back in the early 90s, British scientists from the University of Sheffield made one molecular shuttle synthetic device in which the spatial movement of molecules occurs. To create it, they use rotaxane, an artificial substance in which a ring molecule is strung on a linear molecule. In 2010, a group of American engineers, Milan Stanovich and his colleagues, have created a molecular nanorobot capable of moving on the DNA. During the experiment, the scientists were able to see how their nanorobot was able to independently take 50 steps and move 100 nanometers. The robot, which looks like a spider, can autonomously execute several commands: go to turn, stop. I already 3 years later, English and Scottish, and bioengineering under the leadership of David Ley were able to create the world's first molecular but on the conveyor belt, but on a machine capable of assembling peptide short proteins. In nature, this task is performed by ribosome organelles found in our cells. White engineers took the rotaxane molecule as the basis for their machine and on its rods were able to assemble from individual amino acids a protein of a given property. Thus, we can assume that if Earth scientists are able to create artificial life, why is it not available to other civilizations as well? And in that sense, talk of a creator takes on a slightly different meaning, doesn't it? Write in the comments, what do you think about all this? And if the topic is interesting, let the likes know, we'll keep digging. Bye friends.